Hello, Robert Perrin from AmThink, here for day 2 of Cisco Vision training. Today we'll be covering a variety of topics related predominantly to configuration, video head-end, proof of play, Cisco Vision Plus, most of the topics that we haven't really covered in yesterday's coursework. We are going to start today's sessions talking about configuration and proof of play. Beautiful. All right. So, as usual, after you log into Cisco Vision, you'll land in your content archive. All of the configuration stuff that we're talking about, it will live under the configuration tab, which is the top right-hand tab in your director server. There are a couple of things that we are going to go over that live here, specifically in the Manage Software tab, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So, first, we're going to go back and talk a little bit more about venue configuration. So as we mentioned in our tour of the system, you have the ability to carve up your Cisco Vision environment into multiple subvenues. There are a couple of different reasons that you might want to do this. The first is when you create users, users can actually be created as venue users that only have access to the media players, content, playlists, groups and zones, etc., that are associated specifically with this venue. One interesting thing about the venue configuration is that if you have locations and DMPs assigned to a particular venue, and then you create things like groups that use those DMPs, you create luxury suites that use those DMPs, you'll see that those things that you've created all are automatically assigned to the venue. And we've got a couple of things, because we're again using the production SoFi environment. The performance venue is a really great example of this. In the performance venue, there's a whole separate control plane outside of your Crestron control. They're using QSys for all of their touch panel programming. All of the luxury suites associated with the performance venue are in the performance venue from the Cisco Vision perspective, right? So that way, at some point, when you have an operator who's in that facility, they can have the assignment exclusively of managing that infrastructure without having the ability to look at or touch any of the stuff in the main stadium. But again, a standard admin user or anybody who's not assigned specifically a venue user configuration does have access to everything, no matter how you've carved up the individual venues. So a couple things that you can note about the configuration of individual venues. They can be provided names. They can be given a time zone. So hypothetically, if you had a large campus that was spread across multiple time zones, you could have venues that use different timestamps. It's pertinent to you guys at the Raiders, not currently, but you've had experiences where the time zone for a DMP has had an impact on how web programming is set up. So if you had 2 facilities that span 2 time zones, and you had web content that was reliant on timing, that could be useful. The second piece is that you can change the default content for the media players in that venue. So in this case, every media player in Cisco Vision, whether it's in a venue or not, receives some kind of default multicast. It actually doesn't even have to be multicast. It can be just a URL, and in the case of the Raiders, you know that your scheduling application actually is your default channel. But in the case of carving up into multiple venues, you might have a use case where instead of the logo loop that runs as your default SoFi Stadium in-house content, you might want something different that's default for specifically the performance venue, which you can configure here. Just as a note, default landscape and portrait content really just refers to whether or not the DMP in question has a display spec that rotates it. So is it 1920 by 1080? Is it 1080 by 1920? The Locations tab will show you the assigned locations for that venue. So if we look at the performance venue, for example, you'll note that locations associated with the PV are all assigned to the PV. There are no playlists currently associated with this venue from a demo perspective, but if you created and assigned content to scripts that ran on these media players, you'd see that you could either manually associate these, or they will get that association when you build a script with them. The same thing goes with assigned scripts. You can take a script and assign it particularly to the venue. Anything that you see that isn't assigned, whether it's a location, a playlist, or a script, goes into a non-venue container, and it's just considered administratively accessible. The users group will show you a user that's been assigned particularly to operate just that venue. And you can, once you create a venue operator user, you can assign them from here. because you don't select the venue that they're associated with when you create the user account. The association to the venue has to be done in the page for the venue itself. Much like with locations, playlists, and scripts, you can create and assign tags that are specific to the performance venue, and you can also create folders in your workspace that are specific to the venue. So it's all just a way of taking the objects that we learned how to create during yesterday's sessions and then assign them to the specific subvenue that you want to operate. Users. Most of this is going to be pretty self-explanatory. A couple of important gotchas to remember. The password requirements in Cisco Vision are specific, particularly related to special characters. It got me into trouble when they first implemented this password requirement change in version 6.2. But the only special characters that they accept are an @ sign, an exclamation point, a hashtag, a $sign, and a %sign. If you include any other special character, which includes carets, underscores, dashes, the password will get rejected. To create a new user, you can click the Add button, give that user a name, give them a password, set up an email, and then assign them a role. So what you'll note here, administrative users have access to all facets of Cisco Vision. All venues, anything that you might want to touch in the system, that user can get into it. Concessionaire specifically has access to the widget creation and management process. The idea being that they're doing layouts for menu boards. Neither one of your venues uses the menu board system through the widget manager, so probably doesn't apply, but just as a note, that's what it gives you access to. Content manager role specifically gives you the ability to upload and modify content and playlists, just really everything in your content archive tab. Event operator has the ability to start and stop and control scripts. So if you have a particular user who just want to be able to go in on a day-to-day basis and like start up a video wall script, or start up a cafeteria script or something like that, that's the role that they would have access to. It is a non-editing role. Facility operator goes one step further and provides access to the device management tab, which gives them the ability to not just run and monitor their scripts, but also the status of DMPs and send some basic commands. Help desk and support both have access to the device management tab and the system status tab, but not access to the content library or to running scripts. And then the venue administrator and venue operator, essentially the venue administrator has full configuration access to any asset that's been assigned to a venue that's associated with that user. So venue administrator, much like an overall Cisco Vision administrator, if you imagine that the venues that are assigned to that user are just a whole separate Cisco Vision system, that administrator can do everything an admin could typically do. Yep.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Once you've assigned permissions to a user, can you change that permission later?
You can't change their role. So the difference is, if you create a venue administrator or a venue operator, you can add or remove them to venues, but you can't change the role that's assigned to them. That's fixed when you create the user. So if you wanted to change somebody's access, you'd have to delete and re-add the user or create a second account for them, or one of those things. And so just a couple of notes, these other checkboxes here, force password change on next login does exactly what you would expect it to. When the user logs in the next time, they'll be prompted to change their password. And then you can enable or disable accounts from here administratively as well.